In this session, we will have two 20-minute talks and 3 lightning talks coming up. And let's see where our talks are. Oops, no, that was the wrong one. There you go.
Hi, I'd first like to start out thanking the BOSC committee for allowing me to come and speak to you all today. So my name is Seth Carbon. I'm at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and I mostly work in software at the lab. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about another project that I've been working on, which is the Reusable Data Project. So first, I'd just like to start out by reading you some of this wall of text. It'll be looser from here on out, but some of this wording is important. I just want to go over it real fast. So our goal with the Reusable Data Project is to draw attention to the licensing issues that are challenging the reuse of valuable biomedical data. We hope to encourage the community to work together to improve licensing practices in order to facilitate reusable resources for all. Reusing data comes with numerous challenges that can be better enabled via the practices articulated in initiatives like the FAIR Data Principles and FAIR TLC evaluation frameworks. The Reusable Data Project's focus on licensing issues, narrowly scoped to reusability, is meant to draw attention to the pervasiveness of current practice failures and their effects. Current changes to funder and journal data sharing policies offer us an opportunity to provide explicit direction to upstream data contributors about licensing and other practices that are consistent with the FAIR data principles and positively impact reuse. So that's sort of formally what we're trying to do, but on the ground, what we're trying to do with the Reusable Data Project is to create an objective metric to look at how licensing is actually being done by resources in the real world every day. So, and we're looking at sort of how exactly things are being made available, under what terms they're being made available, and the practical consequences of how this is being done and how that affects access and reusability down the line. So a lot of times people are worrying about, oh, can we get sort of reusability at one step, but we're much more worried about reusability at end steps. If we take data from one resource, mix it with another resource, and pass it on, what is going on with that reusability? So day to day, so what we do is we go to a public resource, we find the license, we classify various aspects of the licensing terms and information found on the website, we evaluate it against our rubric, we look at APIs, we look at downloads, we look at practically how you access information and are able to use it and pass it on. And then what we do is we look at the licensing terms and try to measure it against the reality of what's actually available on the website and how it can be reused. And we also try to keep the conversation going with the community. So we reach out when we need to reach out when things are unclear. We try to make ourselves available on the tracker and various public forums. So you can read more about this at reusabledata.org. We have a lovely website there that I'll talk a little bit more about later. So the rubric that we're using from a mile up is we are looking to make sure that the licensing terms under which resources are making data available, it's clearly stated. So we're looking for unambiguous, hopefully a standard license. We're also looking to make sure that access is comprehensive and non-negotiated. So one of the main barriers to reuse is, you actually, if you'd like to use our data, please contact us. In case you'd like to use, this specific subset, there's additional terms. Use a token, you can only have so many accesses per day, so on and so forth. So we want to make sure that someone can just look at data and use it easily. Accessibility. People say that data is available, but is it actually available? So this is something that we look at. So we also look to make sure that the terms under which data is available avoid restrictions on kinds of reuse and avoid restrictions on who may reuse the data. So just to give you a little bit more information about the criteria, we have 5 points possible. Each one, we award half a point for various things. We have 12 air conditions and 20 evaluated transitions. And you can see more details about our criteria there in great detail. So some of this, a lot of open source software people in here, this might sound familiar, sort of how do you reuse, in what ways can you mix things and all the legal questions that come up around that. So, and I think at this stage, a lot of the conversation that's going on in the sort of the scientific biomedical resource community is going along a lot of the same lines, but some of the answers that are coming up are a little bit different for various reasons, because software isn't necessarily data, but it certainly does seem to rhyme in a lot of cases. And just an amusing anecdote here, to downloading this Microsoft logo, there was actually like 5 pages of terms about how they may terminate it if I don't display it just right. So I'm pretty sure this is technically illegal what I'm doing here, or at least they may be contacting me. So just really quick about our website, and the data that we have. So you can go and take a look. We have tons of visualizations. It's a custom website. We get all our metadata in YAML, so it's really easy for non-computer people to make contributions on GitHub. We have a custom compiler that makes a bunch of static pages on GitHub.io. We have an exploration page that's great to look at. We have a lot of metadata that you can explore and see different sort of cross-cuts of the data and how our different how we've classified everything, how things stack up, as well as details on every resource. And so easy searching, as well as very specific details on different kinds of violations and evaluations for all the different resources that we've done. And at this point, I've personally taken a look at about 100 different terms, but officially we have 57 things in the reusable data set right now. So some very basic high-level results. So first off, as far as accessibility goes, first off, whether or not something is clearly stated. So 53% of resources had some kind of issue with clearly stating their terms under which you could reuse their data. For comprehensive and non-negotiated, 26% had some issue, and 18% could not be reliably determined. So 50% no issue there. Accessibility, so the ability to actually get at the data in a systematic way. 14% had some kind of issue with that, so pretty good there. Avoiding restrictions on kinds of reuse. So 42% had some kind of issue, the majority there, and 18% could not be determined. And avoiding restrictions on who may reuse the data. So 44% had some kind of issue there, and 18% could not be determined. So this is not great, maybe. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the practical consequences of having this kind of issue. So one thing to think about is funding. So as traditional funding resources change, can one of the data sources you work with actually pivot to something else? Do you actually own the rights to change copyright or change licensing terms on all of your data, or are you pinned to what's going on in the community? Like, how well do you understand your own plan B for your data and the ownership? Another important thing to remember is a lot of people sort of have theories, and again, I didn't state this up front. I forgot to say, I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Please talk to your own resource counsel. But I have looked at a lot of licenses at this point. So a lot of people have theories about what it means to, what's fair use. Oh, you can do this. It's fair use. But according to the US Copyright Office, the distinction between what is fair and what is infringement in a particular case will not always be clear or easily defined. There are no specific number of words, lines, or notes that may be safely taken without permission. Okay? And so it's important to remember, like, it's very important to sort of dot your I's and cross your T's with all of this. And so as a concrete example, one of the groups that, with the Monarch Initiative that helped us, that's sort of a core to the Reusable Data Project, they've had trouble getting their data into clinical context. So hospitals and drug companies can be very conservative about the data that you're offering to them. And if you do not have a clear chain of a clear rights chain made available, they may be wary of actually using your data. And can you answer these questions? Who are the rights holders? And can you answer the question, like, what is the exposure to your downstreams if you've made an incorrect decision about who owns what data? So it's important to remember, like, lawsuits could be expensive institutionally, but lack of reuse is expensive scientifically. So we need to, it's important to sort of really think about these rights and how they're moving around. And, just sort of anecdotally, it's from the software world, again, which many of you are familiar with, the Oracle case with Java, billions of dollars, or people who are musically interested, the Stairway to Heaven case, again, millions of dollars just on a few notes. Like, what is your risk really? So practically, let's again look at the left here. And so what this is this big ring here is all of the resources and their ability to be recombined and redistributable with all the other resources that we've looked at. And so basically, the green ones essentially have very open licensing policies and can be recombined with a lot of things, and they're green. And the yellow ones are very often only recombinable with things in the public domain. So just sort of looking at it like this, you can see there's not a lot of sort of reusability, recombinability, redistributability among our different data sets. Looking at the right, and this is an example from a few years ago, theoretically, if you wanted to sort of create and this example is for a multi-site aggregating data resource, so multiple different institutions are all trying to reuse multiple different data resources. And so if you wanted to have clear rights distribution for the entire project for a data set, each one of these lines represents some kind of negotiating interaction with these different resources. And you can see that the time and energy it would take to sort of be able to get data in the clear and sort of try to harmonize all the different terms that are being presented by these different resources could be quite expensive, quite time-consuming, with no guarantee of actually being able to pull it off in the end. So I would propose this is like actually not fine. This is actually really, really bad. So what are we going to be able to do about it? So with the Reusable Data Project, again, what we're trying to be is an objective metric of this. We're not trying to sort of present any specific policy, but we do think that there does need to be some kind of way forward here. So one possibility is do nothing, easy, fun. Like we can all do nothing. It's no problem. But the problems with the data landscape continuing to fragment, those will continue. And by a common technique of trying to pass on the problem to your downstreams by saying like, oh, we don't understand the copyright, we're going to leave it to you to solve it, and if anyone comes after you, it's not our problem. This isn't really very useful. Moreover, the more data that comes in, the more logical issues come up with incompatible terms, and it makes reuse and application, for example, in clinical settings with drug companies harder and harder. Unclear ownership as well, like who actually owns the data that you're processing and reusing. That also makes application and reuse harder and harder. Or we could go ahead and start doing something. So what can we do? Well, one thing is that everyone can sort of just spend a little bit of time to understand the issues and advocate for some kind of change. Understand sort of what it means to make something reusable in sort of more than just saying like, we're using FAIR principles, yeah. But like, how does that actually look on the ground? One possibility is to have organic agreement from the ground up, that everyone starts agreeing on using certain kinds of licenses and licensing terms, and the community just kind of aligns naturally on its own, and that's something we could start here today. Or another way of doing it is to ask for compelled alignment. So this is going to funding agencies and ask them, like, please make us, like if we're getting money, please tell us like certain licensing terms to use so we can all align and all reuse the data and pass it on and make this a very low friction environment. And we can start small. We can start today. So another concrete thing to do, just like super small scale, a few things, is advocate for getting a license out there. So, whoops, unfortunately, I think these numbers might be a little off. We updated recently, but 43% of resources had some trouble with licensing and or clarity. Like if you are part of a resource and you can help affect, the terms on the page, please make sure that licenses are out there. If you see a resource without a license or unclear licensing, just drop them a line, let them know. Advocate for standard licenses. So one of the major barriers for reuse is understanding custom terms and licensing. So all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, and the same goes for custom licenses. Basically, whenever you run into a custom license, lawyers need to be involved to figure out what exactly your reuse ability is in each and every case, and then trying to harmonize that with all the other licenses that you use. It's a very painful process. Standardized licensing makes this a lot easier. And make this part of the basic conversation. So talk to your collaborators, talk to your PIs, talk to the people working under you, and make sure that there's an agreement and understanding about what kind of licensing should be had. And talk to your institution. Your institution probably has a legal department. Like, they're probably pretty friendly, but it's good just to have this conversation early and often. And so I'd also like to point something out interesting that we found in our data. So This is a pie chart of the standard licensing groups that we found. So after the Creative Commons sort of group of licenses, the next largest, a third of our licenses in the orange on the left side were, these are custom licenses. So institutions have written custom terms that you have to parse through. And of the custom licenses, the majority, so this is on the right side in the blue, about 2/3 included restrictive terms. So what does this mean? Well, there's a very clear signal here that needs are not being met somehow. So there's something going on in the community where people are generating custom licensing with restrictive terms. And so we need to start asking sort of, are people trying to sort of protect credit? Are people trying to protect, the data? They're afraid of getting scooped, some kind of embargo system. We need to sort of learn more about what's going on, and hopefully the standard licenses can start meeting these needs. Again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of talk about sort of reusability in the FAIR context is often concerned about reusability at one step. And I think it's very important for everyone to remember it's multiple steps that are important. So I can reuse the data, but I can rebundle it with other things and pass it on with some kind of redistribution rights. So ask the tough questions. Why are we here, and why are these things perpetuated? And what can we do in the community to help smooth the way? This is a short talk. We have a lot of data. We've done a lot of thinking about this. Please come talk to me. Come talk to us at reusabledata.org. If you want to talk about your licenses, I'd love to talk about your licenses. If I have opinions about it. If your resource is not on reusable data, we'd like to get it there. Come talk to us. Open a PR. If it's already there and you want to talk about how we evaluate you, please talk to us. And with just a couple minutes. Well, just a few seconds left, I'd like to just skip over that last point and show you our data from a year ago, and then our data from today. And so we can see things are getting a little bit better. There's a few less custom licenses out there. There's a little bit more use of CC BY 4.0. There's a little bit more inconsistency there, but things are getting better. And this is mostly the reevaluation of things that have been in our system already. So just within the year, just having this conversation, hopefully things have gotten a little bit better. So on that, I'd like to end this with some thank yous. We've published a paper. You can see that here. Please visit reusabledata.org, and sort of the core collaborators, Robin, Melissa, Julie, and Lily, and Letitia. And thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's participated with us so far.
We do already have two questions on
Slido.
The first one is, how do you pitch truly open licenses for data in an atmosphere where university IP departments think free for academic use only is the only way to go?
Okay, so that's a great question. So I don't have a slide here that has sort of all the criteria listed explicitly, but essentially what we do in this case is when we talk about avoid restrictions on kinds of reuse, there's a cutout in our criteria that basically says if you do have a cutout for academic purposes or similar, you still get a half point for it. So essentially, the issue there is well, maybe you can't share your data with drug companies, or if you want to go commercial, you have a problem, but you can still get essentially a very, very high scoring resource if you do have that kind of restriction on it. So it would be great if there was some kind of standard CC style licensing that did have cutouts like that, but that's not their job. But
okay, and another one is, has anybody used this as a training resource, and if used it as a student project for the MLIM students in teaching, would the data they produce be useful?
So this would be data produced by students going and doing additional evaluations, or?
I guess.
Okay, so I'll assume that's true. Yeah, anyone in this room, I highly encourage you, if you have an interest in sort of data and reusability and licenses, please see us. We have an open system where essentially you can make a PR and one of the core people will just double check it. There's a cross check there, and then it gets added into the data set. So if there are other people who are interested in adding stuff, we're always there and available. We're on GitHub too, yeah.
And we have time for one last one. How do you address integrated data sources from multiple different files and sources?
And so that's sort of the nub of the problem. So I would encourage people to read the paper, but essentially one of the reasons this exists is because aggregating data resources do horribly on this, because you cannot harmonize all your sort of data upstreams, right? It's just basically an impossibility. And so when an aggregating resource is trying to redistribute, they basically have to get really squirrely licensing terms that either says that either they ignore it or say, like, we pass it on. But the point is to basically highlight this with a metric and basically say there's a fundamental problem with how data licenses are being done in the community if you cannot sort of legally pass this through. So yeah, aggregates are the problem. They're the problem here.
Thanks again.
Yeah,
we can
thank
move
you.
on.